Be me, I guess. Nothing special. Just a guy who's good with his hands. I work for a company that deals with big, complicated equipment. The kind of stuff that can ruin your day, your week, or your life if you make a mistake. It's not a desk job. You're on your feet, you get dirty, and you have to trust the guy next to you. For years, it was a good place to be. The boss, Mr. Hansen, started out doing the same work we do. He gets it. He never cared about anything but two things. Are you getting the job done right? And are you keeping your crew safe? If you could do that, you were golden. No politics, no drama. Just show up, do your work, go home. The core of our operation is the main field crew, about a dozen of us. We've all been working together for a long time. You get to know how people think without them having to say anything. A glance across a noisy work site is enough to communicate more than a 5-minute meeting in an office. The guy who runs our crew is Raphael. He isn't the oldest guy there, maybe late 30s, but he's the one everyone listens to. Raphael's the kind of person who is completely calm in situations where everyone else would be panicking. I've seen him diagnose a problem with a multi-ton piece of machinery just by the sound it was making, a sound nobody else even noticed. He never raises his voice. He doesn't have to. When he speaks, it's because he has something important to say. His authority wasn't given to him by a title on a business card. It was earned over years of being the best at what he does. We all knew that if you followed Raphael's lead, you'd be safe and the job would get done perfectly. So that was our world, a functional, no-nonsense place where competence was the only thing that mattered. Then, sometime last fall, things started to change. Mr. Hansen had grown the business to a point where he said he needed to hire more office staff to handle the back-end stuff. One of those new hires was our first ever dedicated human resources manager. Her name was Jennifer. She showed up one Monday morning for a general introduction. It was immediately obvious she was from a different universe. We were all in our work gear, steel-toed boots and heavy-duty pants. She was wearing a business suit that probably cost more than my first car, with heels that clicked loudly on the concrete floor of the workshop. Mr. Hansen introduced her, said she was here to help streamline our processes and enhance company culture. We all just sort of nodded. We'd heard corporate speak before, but it was usually from clients, not from our own management. Jennifer gave a little speech. She talked about her background working for some tech startups and how she was excited to bring a forward-thinking, people-centric, and inclusive paradigm to our company. I looked over at one of the older guys, a man who'd been with the company for 20 years. He just had this completely blank expression on his face. He wasn't angry or amused. It was like he was listening to a foreign language he had no hope of understanding. Raphael was standing in the back, arms crossed, just watching. He had a neutral look, but I know him well enough to see he was assessing her, the same way he'd assess a new piece of equipment. The speech ended, and there was a polite, unenthusiastic spattering of applause. We figured that would be the last we'd see of her. HR people usually stayed in the clean, quiet office building, not out on the workshop floor. We were wrong. The very next day, the changes began. They were small at first. We came in to find brightly colored posters plastered all over the walls. They had cheesy stock photos of diverse groups of people in suits smiling and laughing. The slogans were things like, "Synergy makes the dream work," and "A bias-free workplace is a thriving workplace." One of them was put up right next to the high-voltage warning sign on a major control panel. We were all standing around looking at them when Raphael came in. He saw the poster by the control panel, looked at it for a second, and then walked over. He didn't rip it down. He just very carefully peeled it off the wall, making sure not to tear it or leave any residue. Then he walked over to the men's restroom and stuck it neatly on the outside of the door. He didn't say a word. He just went back to getting his gear ready for the day's job. A couple of the younger guys chuckled quietly, but that was it. The message was clear. Jennifer must have seen it later, because the next day the poster was gone from the bathroom door and another one hadn't taken its place by the panel. We thought maybe she got the hint. Again, we were wrong. Her next big idea was something she called the morning kickoff circle. It was mandatory. Every morning, before we could start our actual work, the entire floor crew had to gather in a circle. Jennifer would stand in the middle with a clipboard and ask us to go around and share one thing we're feeling today and one thing we're grateful for. The first time she did this, there was the most awkward silence I have ever experienced. We're a crew of guys who are about to go handle dangerous, high-stakes machinery. The last thing on our minds is sharing our feelings. After about a full minute of dead air, she pointed to one of the older techs. "How about you? What are you feeling this morning?" He just looked at her and said, "Tired." Jennifer's smile faltered for a second. "Okay. And what are you grateful for?" "Coffee." She tried to keep her enthusiasm up. "Great. Thanks for sharing." She moved on to the next guy. His answers were fine and paycheck. It went on like this around the entire circle. One word, low-effort answers. Nobody was trying to be difficult. We just genuinely had nothing to contribute to this exercise. It felt alien and pointless. I remember when she got to Raphael. He was just standing there, patient as ever. "Raphael, what are you feeling today?" He thought for a second and said, "Focused." "And what are you grateful for?" "A good team." That was probably the most heartfelt answer anyone gave, but it still wasn't the kind of emotional vulnerability she was clearly looking for. She made a lot of notes on her clipboard that day. These morning circles continued for 2 weeks. They were excruciating. It was 10 to 15 minutes every morning that we could have spent doing safety checks or loading the trucks. It became a silent protest. The answers got shorter. The silence got longer. Finally, after one particularly painful morning, where half the guys just shrugged, she announced the circles were being reevaluated for effectiveness. They stopped the next day, a small victory. But Jennifer wasn't discouraged. She was determined. It was like she saw our lack of engagement not as a sign that her ideas were bad, but as proof that we were the problem that needed fixing. The next phase was the Anonymous Feedback Initiative. She sent out company-wide emails with links to online surveys. The questions were bizarre. On a scale of 1 to 10, how psychologically safe do you feel when expressing vulnerability to your colleagues? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a microaggression in the workplace? Please describe in detail. Do you feel our company's culture adequately challenges traditional notions of masculinity? Most of us just clicked random numbers to get it over with. It was required, so you had to submit it. One of the guys told me later he answered the microaggression question by writing, "The coffee machine sometimes gives you the small cup size when you press the button for the large one." Apparently, the survey results were not what she wanted. We knew this because her demeanor changed. She stopped trying to be bubbly and cheerful around us. When she walked through the workshop, she had a look on her face like a scientist observing a colony of troublesome ants. She started having closed-door meetings with Mr. Hansen. We didn't know what they were about, but we could guess. Around this time, a new suggestion box appeared on the wall. It was a bright pink box with a cartoon light bulb on it. It stayed empty for a month. Then one day, someone put a half-eaten bag of chips in it. The box disappeared the next day. The atmosphere was shifting. It wasn't hostile, but there was a definite tension. We felt like we were being constantly watched and judged by someone who didn't understand our work, our culture, or us. We just wanted to be left alone to do our jobs. Jennifer seemed to want the exact opposite. She wanted to dissect us. The breaking point came after a minor incident on the floor. 2 of the younger guys were having a disagreement about the best way to rig a specific piece of equipment. It got a little heated. Voices were raised. It wasn't a fight. It was a technical debate between two guys who were passionate about their work. It happens. Raphael walked over, listened for 30 seconds, and then calmly pointed out the correct procedure. He explained why it was the safer and more efficient way. The two guys immediately stopped arguing, nodded, and said, "Yeah, that makes sense." They shook hands and got back to work. Problem solved in under a minute. That's how we handle things. Direct, efficient, and focused on the work. Unfortunately, Jennifer had witnessed the whole thing from a distance. She didn't see a problem being solved. She saw a hostile confrontation and aggressive male posturing. Later that afternoon, she called a surprise all-hands meeting for the floor crew. She stood in front of us with her arms crossed, her clipboard nowhere in sight. This time, it felt different. She wasn't trying to be our friend. She was there to lecture us. She talked for 10 minutes about professionalism and workplace decorum. She never mentioned the two guys by name, but we all knew what she was talking about. She used phrases like unacceptable displays of aggression and the need for emotional regulation. Then she said the line that I think really solidified things in everyone's mind. She said, "This kind of behavior is a classic symptom of a workplace culture dominated by toxic masculinity." The moment she said it, the air went out of the room. It wasn't just corporate jargon anymore. This was personal. She wasn't just a clueless HR person trying to implement silly team-building exercises. She was someone who looked at us, at the way we worked, the way we communicated, the way we solved problems, and saw something toxic, something that needed to be eradicated. We looked at each other. The same guys who would trust each other hanging from a harness 50 feet in the air were now being told that our very nature was a problem. Raphael was completely still, his face unreadable, but I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten. Jennifer finished her speech by saying that she was working on a comprehensive, long-term solution to address these deep-seated cultural issues. The meeting ended. We went back to work in silence. The feeling of brotherhood on the team, which had always been an unspoken thing, felt stronger than ever. But now it was defensive. It was us against her. A week later, the email landed in our inboxes. The subject line was, "Mandatory Workshop, a new model for masculinity in the workplace." I read it 3 times to make sure I was seeing it right. The body of the email explained that as part of an ongoing commitment to a safe and inclusive environment, the company was holding a special training session. It was mandatory for all male employees. The women in the office were not required to attend. The workshop's stated goal was to facilitate a conversation around harmful masculine stereotypes and provide tools for becoming better allies. It was scheduled for the following Tuesday morning. Tuesday, the same Tuesday we were scheduled to start the biggest, most important project of the entire year. We had a client, a massive manufacturing firm that had been on our schedule for 6 months. The job involved installing a new assembly line. It was complex, dangerous, and had an extremely tight deadline. If we were late, the company would face crippling financial penalties. Mr. Hansen had been stressing the importance of this job for months. The workshop was scheduled for 8 a.m. and was set to last 4 hours. We were supposed to be on the road to the client's site by 7 a.m. at the latest. I immediately walked over to Raphael's workstation. He was just staring at his computer screen, reading the same email. "She can't be serious," I said. Raphael didn't look away from the screen. "Looks like she is." "What are we going to do? The client is expecting us first thing in the morning." He finally turned to me. "First, we do our jobs. I'll go talk to Mr. Hansen and sort this out. This is a scheduling conflict. He'll understand." An hour later, Raphael came back. He looked different. He wasn't angry, but he looked disappointed. "What did he say?" I asked. "He said Jennifer convinced him it was critical for company liability," Raphael said quietly. She told him that after the incident last week, not providing this training would be a huge legal risk if someone ever filed a complaint. She had cornered him. She'd used the language of lawyers and liability, the one thing that makes owners like Mr. Hansen nervous. So, we have to go? Raphael nodded slowly. We have to go. But I also told him that we will not be late for the client. I'll call the site foreman and tell him we'll be there by noon. We'll have to work a double shift to catch up. That was Raphael, always finding a solution, always putting the work first. But I could tell he was deeply unhappy about it. We all were. It wasn't about the training itself. It was the principle. It was being forced into a room to be lectured about how to be a man by people who had no idea what our lives were like. It was the implication that we were broken and needed to be fixed. The next few days were tense. Nobody talked about the upcoming workshop. We just focused on prepping for the big job, making sure every piece of equipment was calibrated and ready to go. The work was a comfort. It was logical. The laws of physics don't care about your feelings or your identity. A bolt is either tightened to the correct torque or it isn't. On Tuesday morning, we all came in early, as usual. We loaded up the trucks with everything we would need for the client's site. We wanted to be able to leave the second the workshop was over. At 7:55 a.m., Jennifer came into the workshop. Okay, everyone, time for our session. It's in the main conference room. She was smiling, that bright, false smile again. Slowly, we all put down our tools. We filed out of the workshop and walked over to the office building. It felt like being herded. The conference room had been rearranged. The big table was gone, and the chairs were set up in a large circle. At the front of the room was a whiteboard and a projector screen. Standing there next to Jennifer was a man we'd never seen before. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a cardigan and thick-rimmed glasses. He had a soft, gentle smile plastered on his face. This had to be the facilitator. We all filed in and took a seat. The door closed behind us. There was a palpable feeling of dread in the room. It was like being in a principal's office, but all of us were there at once. Jennifer introduced the facilitator. I don't remember his name. He had one of those names that sounds more like a brand than a person. He started by thanking us for our courage and openness in participating. Courage, to sit in a chair. He then explained the ground rules for the day. He called them rules of engagement for a safe space. Rule 1 was to speak from the eye. Rule 2 was to listen to understand, not to respond. Rule 3 was to be mindful of the space you occupy. Most of us were just staring at him, completely bewildered. He smiled, as if we were all on the same page. Okay, so, for our first activity, I want us to go around the room and each share a time when we felt constrained by the expectations of traditional masculinity. The silence that followed was even heavier than the silence during the morning kickoff circles. It was absolute. Not a cough, not a shuffle of a chair. Just a dozen men staring back at him. He waited, his smile unwavering. No wrong answers here, folks. It's a safe space. Still nothing. He pointed at one of the younger guys. How about you? Ever felt like you couldn't express a certain emotion because you were told boys don't cry? The kid just shook his head. No. The facilitator's smile tightened just a fraction. Okay, well, that's a valid experience too. He tried someone else. Have you ever felt pressured to be the strong, silent type when you really wanted to talk about something? The guy, a veteran tech named Mike, just grunted. I talk when I have something to say. This was going nowhere. The facilitator was getting visibly flustered, but he was trying to hide it. Jennifer was standing in the corner, her arms crossed, a disapproving look on her face. She was watching us like we were all failing a very important test. The facilitator decided to change tactics. He abandoned the group activity and launched into what was clearly a pre-prepared lecture. He clicked a button, and a PowerPoint slide appeared on the screen behind him. It had a title, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. For the next 20 minutes, he talked. He talked about how, as men, we navigate the world with a set of unearned advantages. He explained that things we take for granted, like feeling safe walking alone at night or being taken seriously in a technical conversation, were forms of privilege that we needed to acknowledge. He wasn't yelling. His voice was soft, calm, and incredibly condescending. It was the voice of someone explaining a simple concept to a child. With every sentence, I could feel the mood in the room getting colder. We were a crew of men who worked hard for everything we had. Some of the guys had come from nothing, built lives for themselves through skill and sheer effort. To be told that our successes were unearned was a profound insult. He moved on to his next point. He talked about emotional labor and how men traditionally outsource it to women. He talked about how our silence, our focus on solutions instead of feelings, was a way of avoiding our responsibility to be emotionally present. I glanced at Raphael. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. He was looking directly at the facilitator. His expression was a blank wall. The facilitator then put up another slide. It was a diagram, a pyramid. The title was The Pyramid of Harm. At the bottom of the pyramid were things like jokes and locker room talk. At the very top was violence. He explained in his patient, patronizing tone that the things at the bottom of the pyramid create a culture that enables the things at the top. He was drawing a direct line from our way of talking and interacting with each other to the worst things imaginable. That was it. That was the moment. I think for all of us, that was the line. It was a collective accusation. We were being told that we were, by our very nature, complicit in something awful. And then it happened. The facilitator was in the middle of a sentence about our collective responsibility to dismantle these systems. Raphael moved. He didn't stand up abruptly. He didn't make a sound of protest. He simply, quietly, and deliberately placed his hands on the arms of his chair and pushed himself to his feet. The scrape of the chair legs on the floor was the only sound in the room. The facilitator stopped talking mid-sentence. He and Jennifer both stared at Raphael. Raphael didn't look at them. He turned, took 2 steps to where his jacket was hanging on the back of his chair, and picked it up. He slung it over his shoulder. Then he started walking towards the door. His steps were measured and calm. He wasn't storming out. He was just leaving. Jennifer finally found her voice. "Raphael, this workshop is mandatory. Where are you going?" He didn't stop walking. He didn't even turn his head. He just kept moving towards the door. As he passed the first row of chairs, Mike, the veteran tech, watched him go. Then Mike stood up too. He didn't say a word. He just stood up and followed Raphael. Then the next guy stood up, and the next. It was a chain reaction, a silent, coordinated movement. One by one, every man in that room got to his feet. Nobody looked at each other. Nobody nodded or gave any signal. It was like we were all connected to the same thought at the same time. The thought was, "We are done here." I stood up with them. The feeling was incredible. It wasn't anger. It was a kind of calm, powerful clarity, a quiet refusal to participate in our own humiliation. We filed out of the room in a single line, like a crew walking off a job site. I was one of the last ones to leave. Just before I stepped out, I glanced back. Jennifer and the facilitator were standing there, completely frozen. Their mouths were slightly open. Their faces were a perfect picture of utter, baffled shock. The projector was still beaming the Pyramid of Harm onto the screen behind them in the now empty room. I pulled the door shut behind me, and the click of the latch echoed in the hallway. We walked back to the workshop in total silence. There was no celebration, no high fives. We weren't kids who had just pulled a prank. We were men with a job to do. When we got back to the workshop floor, the atmosphere was all business. Raphael was already by the main truck, checking the straps on a piece of equipment. He looked up as we all came in. Good. Let's finish loading. We're behind schedule. That was it. The incident was over. It wasn't going to be discussed. We all got to work. The familiar sounds of tools and machinery filled the air. It felt good. It felt normal. We were about 10 minutes away from being ready to roll out when my phone rang. It was the main office line. I answered it. It was the client's site foreman. He was not happy. He asked where we were, why we weren't on site, and if we understood how much money his company was losing every hour we were late. I told him we were on our way and that we'd be there as soon as possible. I apologized for the delay. As I hung up, I saw a car pull into the parking lot at high speed. A black SUV. Mr. Hansen's car. He got out before the engine was even fully off. He was wearing his work boots and a jacket, not a suit. He meant business. He strode across the lot and into the workshop. He didn't look angry. He looked determined. Jennifer came scurrying out of the office building to meet him, clutching her clipboard like a shield. She started talking to him before he was even fully inside, pointing back at the office, her voice high and frantic. Mr. Hansen didn't even break stride. He held up one hand to silence her and kept walking right past her, towards us. He came to a stop in the middle of the floor. The entire crew stopped what they were doing and looked at him. He scanned all of our faces, his eyes finally landing on Raphael. Raphael, my office, now. His voice was firm. Raphael put down the wrench he was holding, wiped his hands on a rag, and nodded. The two of them walked towards Mr. Hansen's small, practical office on the edge of the workshop floor. Jennifer tried to follow them inside, but Mr. Hansen turned at the door. "Stay here. I'll deal with you in a minute." The door closed. We all stood there, pretending to work, but really we were all just listening. We couldn't hear everything, but the walls were thin. We heard Mr. Hansen's voice, low and questioning. Then we heard Raphael's voice. It was calm. He wasn't defending himself. He was explaining. We heard bits and pieces. Critical deadline. Client losing money. Told we were the problem. Can't have a man second-guessing himself on a dangerous job. He was talking about safety, about trust, about the mindset you need to do our kind of work. He wasn't complaining about his feelings being hurt. He was explaining, in practical terms, why Jennifer's workshop was not just a waste of time, but a potential danger to the crew and the business. There was a long pause. Then we heard Mr. Hansen say one thing, loud and clear. "Okay, I get it. Send the crew out. Get that job done. I'll handle this." The door opened. Raphael came out. He looked at us and gave a single sharp nod. "Let's go." That was our signal. We moved. The energy was high. We finished loading the last of the gear in record time. As we were climbing into the trucks, Mr. Hansen came out of his office. Jennifer was waiting for him, looking anxious. "Jennifer, you're next," he said, and gestured for her to go into his office. The door closed again. This time, we didn't have to strain to hear. Jennifer's voice started first, high and defensive. We could hear words like insubordination, hostile work environment, legal exposure. Then Mr. Hansen's voice cut through. It was not loud, but it was hard as steel. "Your job, your only job, is to support the people who make this company money. That's it. You don't fix them. You don't re-educate them. You make sure they have what they need to do their jobs safely and efficiently." We heard Jennifer try to interrupt, something about corporate responsibility. Hansen's voice cut her off again. "Responsibility? My responsibility is to my clients and my employees. The men you just insulted are the best at what they do. I built this company on their skill and their loyalty. You walked in here, and in 2 months, you did more damage to morale than a decade of bad economic downturns." There was a pause. You looked at my greatest asset, and you called it toxic. This isn't a university campus, Jennifer. This is a business. Results matter here, and you have produced no positive results. In fact, you nearly cost me my biggest contract of the year." We heard one last, desperate attempt from her, her voice trembling. "You can't just—" "I can," Mr. Hanson said, his voice final. "You're fired. Get your things and leave. Your final check will be mailed to you." A few moments later, the office door opened. Jennifer came out. Her face was pale. She wasn't crying, but she looked completely shattered. She was holding her clipboard, but her hands were shaking. She had to walk past us to get to her car. The entire crew was gathered by the trucks ready to leave. As she walked by, nobody said a word. Nobody smirked or laughed. We just watched her go. There was no sense of victory, just a quiet, somber sense of order being restored. She got in her car and drove away without looking back. Mr. Hanson came out and walked over to us. He looked tired. He looked at Raphael, then at the rest of us. "Sorry about all that," he said. "It won't happen again. Now go do what you do best." Raphael just nodded. "On it, boss." We all climbed into the trucks. The engines started. As we pulled out of the yard and onto the main road, the feeling was one of pure relief. The nonsense was over. The outside world, with all its strange ideas and accusations, was behind us. Ahead of us was a job, a difficult, complicated, important job, and we were the men who were going to get it done. It felt good to be back to normal.